Really, sometimes I like to help out a up-and-coming channel who entertains the conspiracy theories regarding to certain events, especially to the events of September 11, 2001. And in this regard, I'm going to make a response video to a young gentleman who goes by the name of Mikesperspective. As you can see, his channel's here. And this is not going to be an attack video of any sort. It's actually, hopefully, it's going to be a helpful video to the young man who seems that he's just getting his feet in the 9/11 pool. And just like what happened with me and most others who are researching this field, they come across the fringe conspiracy theorists regarding 9/11, and there's so many of them. And in this regards, Mike's Perspective actually did a video regarding Christopher Bollyn. Now, here's the channel. You can see he's got 48 videos. He's got 96 subscribers. He's just starting out. So, like I said, this is not a video attacking his character or anything like that. Hopefully, the video will come across as a helpful one for him. So, he did a video based on Christopher Bollyn, who, of course, to those who follow my channel for years, know I have nothing but disdain for this individual, only because most of his statements turned out to be false and misleading. He has spread so many wild conspiracy theories. So many people love him is because, one, he's a young man who basically just attacks Israel. Now, look, for those who are saying that, I'm the defender of the official narrative, there was no such thing as an official narrative for 9/11. The 9/11 Commission report is not the official narrative of 9/11. The 9/11 Commission report is an incomplete one. It didn't go through all the evidence, didn't go through all the information. That's why it's incomplete. It's not an official one. Secondly, even some of the commission staffers and panelists themselves basically said that the commission was basically interfered with by the State Department under uh, its own executive director, Philip Zelikow, who's personal friends with the National Security Advisor under George Bush Jr., Condoleezza Rice. So you knew exactly where the investigation was going. It was going to go nowhere. So here's this young man who's just starting out with 9/11, and he follows the works of Christopher Bollyn. Now, I'm going to assume that this young individual sees Israel as a foe of sorts, that their government is criminal. I don't think this guy's an anti-Semite. None of his videos basically, delve into right-wing nationalism or anything like that I've seen. So I think he's just, he doesn't know any better. And, that's what happens. You're just turning out to 9/11. You are, well, you don't realize it is that your worldviews only tell you to look at certain information. Now, if you distrust the Israeli government, by extension, you're going to look at information that caters to a worldview that blames Israel for certain things. Now, with 9/11, this is exactly what Bollyn hopes for. Bollyn looks for young individuals that have a disdain or a prejudice against Israelis, Jews, because he's a raging anti-Semite or he plays one. I think he's a fake, actually, in that he wants to ruin the reputation of serious researchers who are investigating Israel for pre-intelligence operations that existed and may have had sensitive information that could have, if shared and acted on, could have stopped 9/11. But the Israelis are not the only ones. But to Bollyn, everything 9/11 related, and to every terrorist action that happened in the 80s or 90s, is Israel related. Israel's behind everything. And I think he does this so that anybody who, criticizes Israel regarding their pre-intelligence operations from 9/11 is seen as an anti-Semite. Now, I don't have evidence for this. I think that he does play the part. He could be just a raging anti-Semite. He worked for American Free Press, worked with people like Eric Hufschmidt, even people that knew him, like Michael Collins Piper, distrust him. So let's get on with the video and see what the young man has to say.
After 9/11, there were some major changes in the US. With the Patriotic Act affecting the United States, as well as a devastating attack on the Twin Towers, but there were some very odd details and very shocking details as well for people who spoke out, including Christopher Bollyn, who wrote a book called Solving 9/11. He
Now,
even
think of it,
had
Michael, imagine you're an investigator. You research 9/11. And for Bolin, he started, I think, what, 2002, right? Now, he was a big face for the 9/11 truth movement for 5 years straight. Let's say 2009 to 2015, 6 years. Now you don't hear anything from him. Nothing new. Doesn't make any content. Yes, he's wrote 2 or 3 books. He's done his lectures, yes. Well, he doesn't do them anymore. And we've had new information come out, Michael, about 9/11. But he's not going to do any new content because Christopher Bollyn doesn't believe that 9/11 was perpetrated by Arab fundamentalists. And without that, you can't basically go and study what, say, Donald Canestraro found out. Donald Canestraro, if you don't know who he is, worked for the Office of Military Commissions in 2016 to investigate Saudi role, the kingdom, involved with the 9/11 hijackers. What he found was that the CIA, along with Saudi intelligence, had indeed run an illegal operation inside the United States where the hijackers were provided logistical and financial support. Now, if you're Christopher Bollyn, you're not going to read that. You're not going to share that with your audience. Why? Because Bollyn doesn't believe any of the planes were hijacked by Arab fundamentalists. And by that extension, Michael, he just eliminated a conspiracy that turned out to be true. Now you have no connection with the CIA and the hijackers and the crime. So if there's no hijackers, there's no connection with the intelligence services involved with 9/11. And you have to ask yourself, why does he do that?
has done presentations in front of people. Who is Christopher Bollyn and why did he talk or come out about the truth about 9/11, especially to do with aspects of it? If you don't know who Christopher Bollyn is a writer and author of a book called Solving 9/11. I'm not sure if he's written anything else.
I want to imagine you're an investigator. I'm sorry, I lost this point to you, Michael. Imagine you're an investigator and the title of your book is going to be Solving 9/11. To me, that reeks of arrogance. How can you solve 9/11? And when did that book come out? Right? I'm going to look at my phone. I'm going to see what year that book came out, right? So, Solving 9/11. I want to say it was 2009. Actually, it came out in. Oh, come on. When did it come out? I want to 2012. April 12th, 2012. Now imagine 11 years after the events of September 11th. You're going to actually up until that point, you're going to say there's no new information. It's all been solved. I solved the crime. I'm the only person in the world to solve this crime. And I'm going to title my book Solving 9/11. Meanwhile, there are millions of documents in the National Archives that are classified for the next 20, 30 years. There's been new revelations that come out. Just in the last 3 years alone, the Canestraro documents and Operation Encore, which was an FBI investigation into the Saudis' role involved with 9/11, right? Does Bollyn mention any of these things? Of course not, because he doesn't believe in Arab fundamentalists or the CIA involved with the Arab fundamentalists or the NSA for that matter, right? It's just an Israeli plot. But let me tell you something, Michael. He doesn't tell you everything about the Israelis. Have you ever heard the Gerald Shea memorandum? You probably haven't. If you have, credit to you. If you haven't, it's a document that details the Israeli art student ring and the moving front companies that were basically just one giant operation that involved over 200 people, the largest foreign intelligence ring in U.S. history that we know of. And what they did was they infiltrated or were spying on the DEA, the FBI, Southwest Laboratories, the Secret Service, and just so happens that they lived in close proximity to all the 19/9/11 hijackers. Now, Christopher Bollyn will have you believe that Israel wasn't monitoring any of the hijackers. They're all patsies. What does he mean by that? That means there had to have been people that are going to be set up for the crime itself. Okay, so the Israelis were actually monitoring the patsies, for example. Does he ever mention about the Gerald Shea memorandum in any video he's ever made? No. He doesn't even know the document even exists because Christopher Bollyn doesn't read. He doesn't read documentation without bias. I don't believe in any human construct. I'm not involved or imbued with human ideology like religion, racism, sexism, politics. I erased these from my mind years ago. It was a process. It wasn't overnight, but it changed my life. And I can look at certain events in history without prejudice. I'm not prejudiced to look at information. I know the Israeli government is an abhorrent government. It's guilty of crimes currently. But I'm not going to blame 9/11 on Israel because I hate the Israeli government. That's what Christopher Bollyn wants you to believe. I want you to look at it, things critically. That's all I want from here for you. I want you to basically take Christopher Bollyn's points, run it through the scientific method, see if anything he says is true, and not just go by his word. Don't go by mine. I'd be horrified if you did. If I make any certain points in this video to you today that you never heard of, I would like to think that you would basically run it through a series of tests to see if it's true. Is it referenced anywhere? Are there any eyewitnesses to the events he's talking about? Are there any written documentation? I mean, this is a process. This is, it's a slow moving process. I've studied 9/11 for 17 years. I'm not an expert, but I have a podcast. I have a very large channel. I think I'm the largest 9/11 channel outside of DJ Thermodetonator in the world when it comes to 9/11. But I wouldn't say that I'm the end all of the end all. Bollyn likes to think that he's, the best 9/11 researcher on planet Earth. He named his book Solving 9/11. I think that's really reeking of arrogance.
But I know that he has actually given lectures on very odd aspects, or at least to do with involvement of Israel of when 9/11 happened. And his story is basically what happened was that when they did forensics on 9/11 to do with either the plane crashes, if I can remember specifically, of them taking up this weird blue powder concrete. I can't remember specifically what I talked about. And he wanted to do forensics on 9/11. And what ended up happening with Christopher Bollyn is that one time he was actually just minding his own business one day, and then eventually he had a knock on the door, and he went out to go talk to the police. But what was odd about this is that the police didn't identify themselves or anything, and I don't think they were even uniformed officers. And he eventually had his house searched, at least if I can remember specifically, and he was tackled and he was tasered as well by all these random police that would show up. And this was very odd and very scary thing that occurred because his wife and his daughter was there and actually saw him getting attacked and arrested by these police officers supposedly. And before that there was a couple of white or black vans that were following him around and a few agents. And I think the reason why he was attacked was because he was investigating into the forensics behind 9/11. And because of this, when he actually eventually did come out and actually wrote this book, Solving 9/11, he said that Israel was actually involved in the Twin Tower attacks. And the aspects of what he talked about went right back to the 60s, if I can remember about where he actually talked about the, I think, Ergun, if I can remember specifically, where it was like the Middle Eastern.
Yeah, Stern and Ergun gangs. But again, to your point, Michael, about Bollyn blaming the attacks on Christopher Bollyn, what just going by that claim, that's a very revealing claim. It's an extraordinary claim to make. When you say, if you're going to say that the government of Israel planned, orchestrated, facilitated, provided training, financial support for this operation, I want to see documentation that backs up that statement. Guess what, Michael? It's not going to exist because it doesn't work like that. And Bollyn likes to make a simple view of 9/11 that there's this huge nexus of Israelis, right, that can do whatever it wants, that can get away with whatever it wants, that doesn't leave a trace of evidence, right? I'm not saying that the Israelis were not involved in any aspect of 9/11. I'm saying that they were generally involved with pre-intelligence operations. I could prove that. Bollyn takes it the next step. And what he's basically saying to you, Michael, is trust me, I wrote a book about it. If you go to his book, look at his references. There aren't many. And most of the references are coming from who? People who are like minded like him. He's not going by any source methods from the government. He's not going by any external documentation outside of any agency or organization or independent researcher. None of this. In other words, he's basically saying, just trust me. And I would tell you, don't make that mistake. The most meticulous part of researching 9/11 was running information through fact finding. I would say 85%, not an exaggeration, of my studies with 9/11 were based on investigating information and running it through the scientific method. It's what a proper investigator will do. You would like to think that when a homicide detective comes upon like a crime scene, you would be horrified if, you were a friend or a family member of the deceased that was killed to hear a cop say, well, I know what didn't happen here before even looking at any of the evidence. That's what Christopher Bollyn is saying. I know the Israelis were involved. That's what he's saying, without question. I know the Saudis are patsies, and I know the Bush government is evil, that they were similarly maybe involved, but it was all Jews. This simplistic response to 9/11 is what kills me because 9/11 is much more complex than that.
Version of 9/11, which he basically said that it was like a shock and awe. And if you don't know what shock and awe is, Christopher Bollyn explained it as basically just a really mass event that creates a lot of shock and awe, which is basically like something so traumatic and something that you couldn't even believe that this thing has actually happened, that people can actually just take over and say that it was a, I guess, like really mass event, that it would be very traumatic. And this was very an odd thing to happen, because when Christopher Bollyn talked about Ergun, which is this, I guess, the version of the shock and awe that happened in the Middle East, it was to do with how Israel was trying to get into power after World War II, and this was sort of around when they were trying to do, I guess people would call them psyopses, and pretty much had Ergun and have this pretty much this shock and awe in order for them to have an excuse to attack another place. And Christopher Bollyn would go on to talk about these details about how this is quite similar to how 9/11 happened, when there was just something that was major before and then something after, and there were some other details of when the Twin Towers crashed in and these other buildings collapsing near it, but I'm not going to talk about that too much, even though I should do. I just think I want to talk a little bit more about what Christopher Bollyn's talking about.
Yeah, so I can't be very helpful here because I'm not an engineer. I wish I knew more about the World Trade Center collapses. But because I'm very limited in my understanding of physics and engineering, I would rather not talk about this issue with any authority. I would defer to people like David Chandler or Wayne Costi, but Tony Zambotti, uh, to talk about these issues because I don't. I don't know if there was thermite involved or pre-planted explosives. I happen to believe there were in the basement anyway, because we had people coming out of the World Trade Center that heard explosions in the B levels. I don't know if the jet fuel came all the way down by that, but there was reports of explosions even far after the planes had impacted the towers. I would rather defer to somebody else who's much more learned to me in regards to engineering. So, in other words, I know my limits, right? I would rather let you listen to other people far more qualified than me in regards to this issue instead of me giving you my opinion, which means absolutely nothing. Do I think the towers came down by pre planted explosives? Yes. Can I prove it? No.
And when he was giving this lecture, he also talked about the USS Liberty, which is basically what happened was that these Israelis would actually attack the USS Liberty, and what ended up happening was it actually didn't sink it, because if it sank, it would have caused a nuclear war, apparently, according to Christopher Bollyn, because if it sank to the bottom, Egypt would have been blamed, and that would have caused a nuclear war. So what ended up happening was they would send bombs underneath it through torpedoes and blow up and kill all of the people inside the USS Liberty. And this was a very shocking detail because there was all these other things that happened before 9/11 and the build-up up until, and he gives a timeline of when this happened. Now, I haven't really finished off the documentary because I wanted to look at it just to absorb the information a little bit better. But I guess what I'm trying to say is that Christopher Bollyn has seen all of these aspects happen about Israel's involvement in 9/11 and also other aspects of this weird blue concrete powder, and as well with what ended up happening with him being arrested randomly and it not really making any sense. He hasn't even broken any law.
Yeah, here's the problem with that. He assumes his position that the Israelis were involved with planting thermite in the World Trade Center. What evidence does he have to present this, Michael? Why is he not in a court of law? If you're going to say, oh, the courts are basically not going to investigate any foreign nation for 9/11, well, that's false. Currently, right, I live in New York. Currently, right now in the Southern District of New York, the courts are entertaining another ally, Saudi Arabia, involvement with the 9/11 attacks. Do I think it's a pipe dream that the Israelis are going to be in court? Yeah, I agree. I mean, but the effort can be made to try and get them in the court, but you can't get them in court without providing any verifiable evidence that they were involved with the 9/11 attacks. This is the reason why Bollyn and Richard Gage and Rebecca Roth and all these people, Michael, you'll never see them in a court of law. None of these 9/11 so-called experts in the truth movement, none of them. I'm talking about the fringe conspiracy theorists. There's a lot of people in the 9/11 truth movement who are level-headed, who are rational, but there is just a too much of a large percentage of self-professed experts who propose the most ridiculous ideas and notions surrounding this major event. Anywhere from hologram planes to Judy Wood space beams to living hijackers to none of the planes crashing anywhere in the United States, even at the World Trade Center, Pentagon, Shanksville. I mean, the list is endless. Bollyn basically one time said on the Adam Green show that World Trade Center 6, the black building that had the circular damage to it, said it was shot from the air by the United States Air Force with a missile. Now imagine there are tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands even, in Lower Manhattan who are looking in the direction of the World Trade Center. And not one person has ever come up and said that they saw a military plane shoot a missile into World Trade Center 6. I mean, just the notion of this is absurd. He also went on to say that Khalid Sheikh Mohammed in Guantanamo Bay is not the real Khalid Sheikh Mohammed. It's actually a fake, somebody playing the part. Another extraordinary claim, easily dismissed by the mere fact that Khalid Sheikh Mohammed's nephew, Abdul Aziz Ali, also known as Amr al Baluchi, is in Guantanamo with them being charged for 9/11 attacks. So his nephew doesn't realize he's talking to a double, a fake. Do you see what I'm going with this, Michael? There's, don't be embarrassed. Don't be ashamed. I've got close friends that who I call a 9/11 circle, co-researchers like Darren Harvey. He was once a Bollyn follower and warns people about people like Bollyn. I come from the Paul Thompson school, but I once, believed that Loose Change was a really good film. Most of the 9/11 researchers, the serious ones, came from the fringe conspiracy mindset because that's what saturates the internet, unfortunately. But there's going to come at a time, Michael, that you're going to have to start disseminating fact from fiction. Because if you continue to just take people for their word, it's not going to just end with Bollyn. You're going to run into even far more egregious abuses of fringe conspiracy claims. Judy Wood, for example. And, Phil Jahan from Let's Roll Forums that don't even believe the jumpers were real. In fact, Phil Jahan and Ryan Staveley used to run a forum called Let's Roll Forums. And I ran into them a couple of times over the years. And they basically say that FBI agents are throwing mannequins out the World Trade Center. Yeah. Just when you thought you heard it all, you've seen it all, you haven't seen or heard anything yet. Bollyn makes a lot of claims over the years that turned out to be outright false and still proposes to them.
Was just that they were just trying to seize evidence off him. I remember specifically if there was anything that they found on him or that they were trying to collect evidence. I'm not really sure, but I can tell you that Christopher Bollyn. Then this goes into the whole dancing Israelis, where there were these couple of men that were actually found outside just dancing after 9/11, and this was a video that was leaked online, and people have said that it was alleged and this didn't actually happen. But again, like I said, there were some weird details about 9/11 before and after, because I said it was Saudi did this and they did it for revenge against America for supporting Israel, something along those lines.
Okay, a little bit more about that. They were called the dancing Israelis by the media. In fact, they weren't seen dancing. There was a woman in this building called Doric Towers, which is located in Jersey City, and it has a overlooking shot of Lower Manhattan through the Hudson. And she was looking with her binoculars because she's older, and she heard a commotion below her. And below her is the garage levels. She's about 6 stories up above the garage levels, and saw 3 men celebrating. They were high-fiving, hugging. She thought that was very strange and out of the ordinary and didn't fit with the mood, obviously. And the great thing about this woman is that we probably would have not known about the Israelis' intelligence operation if it wasn't for her. And she took down the license plate. And East Rutherford Police Department later pulled out an all points bulletin, a bolo, about an urban moving systems vehicle, and they arrested these men. In fact, at the time there were only 3, but when they detained them, there was 5 of them. Sivan Kurzberg, Paul Kurzberg, Oded Elder, Omar Mamre, and Yaron Shmuel. Those are the 5 Israelis. Bollyn likes to think that, they were the end all to be all, but they weren't. In fact, there was more. Bollyn doesn't talk about the other 2, Roy Barak and Modi Bupel. You'll never hear these names from just about anybody almost. They work for Urban Moving Systems. They were on their way to a move in Ohio on September 11th. When they were coming back, there was no furniture in the truck. It just so happens that the freeway that they were taking just passed by Shanksville plane crash. Now, I could talk to you more about this theory I have regarding who they are, and they're much more important than the dancing Israelis. Not to say that the dancing Israelis angle is not important, because the FBI released its report. It's redacted, but it does show that these guys basically were part of a foreign intelligence operation that were monitoring who? The hijackers. And when you read the Gerald Shea memorandum, it really comes into play. Now, I have a whole playlist, Michael, that you could look on my channel. It talks about the Gerald Shea memorandum. I think it's 26 chapters where I read chapter by chapter the document itself and all the people that were involved that Bollyn doesn't even talk about.
And afterwards as well, there was also a detail of how they wanted to disrupt the whole of the Middle East by doing things like, for example, they would take all of the aspects of, I guess, try to disrupt the Middle East through just having like war and a lot of it being displaced in a lot of the Middle East, and why it's very unstable. Though I'm not saying one side is creating stability of the other, what I'm trying to say is that there has been this weird aftermath that's happened, and especially all the way build up until when 9/11 happened. So anyway, hope you enjoyed this video. It's about really talking about Christopher.
Okay, I'm going to stop it there because it's a short video, and I just wanted to address because I like helping younger people. If this was an established channel that caters to the crack pottery, I don't care anymore. But for young people just starting out, like this young man here is, I would like to think that with videos I make regarding certain points or certain people that I find very suspicious and irresponsible. I would like to think that I'm helping young Michael here regarding it. Now, Michael, it's up to you if you want to say that I'm, a shill or, somebody not to be trusted. Hey, that's the right way of thinking. And I want you to basically fact check me, just like I want you to fact check Christopher Bollyn. Don't read documents and files or other books that cater to that type of mentality, because what you want is to basically play the devil's advocate, right? Because in the middle is the truth, right? The truth will set you free. And information is power. I've done countless videos where I tell people that, the reason why I do this is because I want people to be empowered with information, because you're paralyzed by belief. You can believe whatever you want. You believe the Jews were involved with 9/11, but do you know it? If there is no plane crashes in the Pentagon Shanksville that Bollyn claims, do you know it? Because I could tell you right now that's not true. Does that mean I agree with the official narrative? There is no such thing as the official narrative. It's an incomplete one. People saw the plane crashes for themselves. It left behind little plane debris because the planes were going at a very high speed. When was the last time you saw a martyrdom plane crash? Never in your life. It's very rarely ever happened, but it has happened. And when you compare martyrdom plane crashes like PSA 1771 or Germanwings 9525, go look at the debris field. You won't find an engine, a tail, a wing, or even a whole human body, because it's obvious what happens when a plane holding, over 38,000 pounds of fuel crashing into a high rate of speed into a building or into the ground. You're not going to find a whole body. You're not going to find a tail. You're not going to find wings. You're not going to find much in the way of large plane debris. That's why they found little plane debris. But they found plane debris and people witnessed it. But people like Bollyn will have you believe that planes weren't even hijacked to begin with. Well, if there's no hijackers, there's no intelligence services to monitor these people, and you lost that link. If there's no intelligence to monitor these people, how can you tie that to federal government, foreign governments who are basically using that information to go to war with countries that have nothing to do with 9/11. You see where this is going, Michael? All right. If I hope this reaches you, and if you want to contact me on Twitter _Ab Fitzgerald, I'll shoot you some information where you can contact me directly. And take care and have a good night.